I'm fired up and I'm ready to go. I'm fired up and I'm ready to go. I'm fired up and I'm ready to go. This is the Billionaire Brown experience. Let's go.
So a great place that we can start is the worst part of your story is what, John?
Well, the worst part is this is the good part, but the worst part is that I was a heroin addict.
Heroin?
Yes.
Okay. When did you start using heroin?
I started using heroin when I was about 17. But my drug addiction and my alcohol addiction had started way before that.
Before 17?
Yes. Yeah.
You've been taking drugs since what age? What age did you start using drugs?
I started using drugs about 11, 12 years old.
Wait, what drug were you using at 11 or 12 years old?
Alcohol and weed.
How was you getting your alcohol and weed?
Well, older friends in the neighborhood, just guys that I'd come across. The first time I got drunk, I was 11 years old. I had an older friend, stole some liquor from his dad, and we got drunk. I was always hanging with these older guys in the neighborhood. I always found myself in that kind of crowd.
Okay. And when did your parents find out that you were doing any source of drugs?
Well, that's another story in itself as well. My grandmother raised me. My dad wasn't around. My mother was in and out. My mother suffered from addiction as well. I think they knew early on I was drinking, but I was a rebellious kid, and I was a kid with no direction. So I took to the streets. I took to my friends. I took to what was going on out there, and I found myself quickly in the midst of drug addiction and alcohol addiction.
At what point, even if you have to look in hindsight to give us the most accurate answer, at what point were you doing it on the regular basis?
When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I was smoking weed on a regular basis. So there was a guy that up the street from me that sold weed. He sold loose joints up the street, and I was stealing $1 every day. My uncle lived in the home, and he always had a change, little container of change. I'd steal $1 every day, rearrange the change, and go buy a loose joint. And that's kind of where the obsession to use drugs and being taken out of myself began. And from that day forward, for a long time, it progressed. The drugs got worse. They got harder until I ended up using heroin. Okay,
so marijuana it probably didn't have, out of all of the different drugs that you just mentioned, it probably has the least effect on you, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that's not okay. That's bad, but it's not heroin, right?
Yeah.
So you're utilizing these. You're drinking alcohol. When did your drinking of alcohol begin to be a regular habit, like on the daily or weekly basis?
Probably about 15, 16 years old. Yeah, and that was kind of a staple in my life. Like that was always there. If I was hanging in the street, I was drinking, 40 ounces, and in the park, getting drunk, celebrating with the boys in the neighborhood. Alcohol was always a main component to whatever was going on.
Okay, and where are you from?
I'm from Camden.
Oh, you from Camden?
I am, yes.
Okay, I'm from New Jersey too, so shout out to New Jersey.
Definitely.
Yeah, and my stepdad is actually from Camden.
Okay.
Yeah, are you familiar with Camden history?
Some, not too much, but some.
Okay.
My favorite poet lived in Camden and died in Camden.
Who's that?
That's Walt Whitman.
Walt Whitman was from Camden?
Not from Camden. He was from New York, from Brooklyn, but his house is on Mickle Street across from the county jail. So wow. He lived there and died in Camden.
Wow, that's a little fun fact for Camden.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so so we got alcohol, we have marijuana, we have heroin. When did heroin become a regular thing?
When when I was about 17. Prior to that, I'd started also using cocaine. So I started using cocaine about 14 years old.
What?
I had older friends. I had friends that were already in the drug game. I hung with guys my age, but then we had the older friends, and they were already in the drug game, and so just hanging around with them, they did coke. Naturally, I kind of went in that direction as well.
Okay, now, did the authorities ever become an issue during these younger ages? Like, did you ever get into a situation, maybe an adult or some type of authority approached you on this drugs that you're using?
No, not really. That's kind of what I lacked. I lacked in my life. Like I was raised by my grandmother. My grandmother worked really hard to care for not only me, but a lot of my cousins as well. I found that people in my family just didn't want to take care of their kids for some reason, or were incapable of doing so. Even now, as I'm an older person now, and I look back even on my mom. I don't know what happened with her, but I just realized she was just incapable of caring for me. Whatever was going on, I know she suffered from addiction, and she suffered from a lot of other things. I don't hold any grudge on that any longer, but I just realized that she just couldn't do it. She couldn't take care of me. So my grandmother raised me. She was working really hard, and I was kind of left to my own devices. And I was out in the street and doing the things that I was doing, getting into trouble, and getting high, drinking and getting high. I don't think they had any idea. My grandmother at least didn't have any idea that I was like using cocaine when I was 14 years old.
Okay. How were your grades at this point? Were you in school still, actively in school?
Not really. I mean, I was attending, but it turns out after sixth grade, everything kind of went downhill. So I went to sixth grade. I think I was about 12 years old. I was still doing good. I was in the top classes. And I met some other people from like East Camden and new people, and from there it just went downhill.
From sixth grade.
What's that?
From sixth grade, It went downhill.
Yeah. I don't know how I got promoted to seventh grade, but somehow I got to seventh grade, and then I just lost interest in school. I was getting high a lot. I was probably going to school maybe twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. We'd have these big hooky parties where we'd go to someone's house and all hang out there all day. And I got caught a lot. I got caught, playing hooky and cutting school. But probably about seventh grade, I stopped taking report cards home. No one asked me. I got in a little trouble for when I got caught cutting school, but it didn't deter me. I just continued to, go down that route.
Did you ever finish?
Ultimately, I got a GED.
Oh, okay. Good for you.
So
at what age?
I was 21. I think I was about 21, but I did seventh grade twice. I did eighth grade twice. I went to ninth grade. By that time, I already had a license and a car, and I was in ninth grade. So here I am, a 17-year-old in ninth grade with 14-year-olds, 14 and 15-year-olds. And at that point, I quit. I got left back again. And it wasn't because I wasn't intelligent. Like I could do the work, I just wasn't doing the work because I had found this other thing. I had found the drugs, the alcohol, and just kind of hanging in the streets, and I preferred that. Okay,
and this is probably not too far-fetched of a question, but at what age did you lose your virginity?
14.
14?
Yeah.
Wow. Did that have, there were drugs involved. Was the person you had sex with also doing drugs with you?
Not like in that particular instance, but that person was also a part of our group as well. So, there was drinking and smoking weed and all that, going on, but not in that particular instance. But the funny thing is I lost my virginity there at 14, but I didn't have sex again until I was 17.
Wait, why? Why was that?
Because drugs and alcohol was more important.
Wow. So when you had it at 14, it wasn't good enough for you to try it again?
Yeah, I guess.
Or the drugs were that much better?
Yes. Yeah. Like if you gave me a choice, if there was a woman here or a girl, or they wanted to do something, but you had alcohol and you had weed or you had coke, I'm going towards the drugs.
Wow.
I'm going in that direction.
So I guess that's kind of good and it's kind of bad, right?
It depends, but it turned out to be bad for me.
Okay. Yeah. So now how was you getting the money for it? I know you said when you were getting those little dollar joints, you were stealing, little change here and there, rearranging the change. But when it comes to cocaine and heroin, from what I know, those are very expensive drugs.
Yeah.
So how were you buying these at such a young age? How were you getting your drugs?
Well, I started working when I was about 15, doing roofing. I had an uncle that had a small roofing outfit. I started working in the summers for him, which ultimately led to like a full-time job. So there was money right there. Normally what would happen is Friday I'd get paid and Monday I'd be broke. So I'd be borrowing money throughout the week and all that. But I always, for the most part, I always had a job until I was about 18. And that's when my heroin addiction took off and I was selling drugs full time.
Were you selling because now you're saying your drug use picked up. So the normal person like myself would ask the question, were you using the drugs that you were selling also? Sometimes,
yeah. I sold crack and I was doing heroin, but every once in a while, I would use the crack as well. We used to do a thing where, you take some of the tobacco out of a cigarette, put the coke in there and smoke that. I was doing that, but mostly it was alcohol and heroin.
Okay. Would you consider yourself at any point a junkie or a crackhead?
I was definitely a junkie. Yeah.
Okay. And how would you define a junkie?
Well, I didn't see it at the time because it seemed to like I looked up to these older guys that was using dope before I started using dope. They seemed real cool. They were nodding all the time. I always looked up to the wrong thing and the wrong people. Just to take a step back real quick, I had an uncle that spent probably all of his 20s in jail in Bordentown, assaults and stuff like that. And we'd go to visit him on the weekend. He was the guy, and he's in jail, and we'd go visit him and take him food packages and stuff like that. He was the guy that I looked up to. He was the guy that I wanted to be like. He was tough. And one of the things about me is that I grew up in Camden and I grew up around a lot of violence and I grew up around a lot of trouble, but I knew deep down inside that I wasn't that tough. I put on a show and I got wrapped up in the streets and I was in a lot of predicaments that I didn't want to be in, but I didn't know how to get out of. So I say that to say that, like, I looked up to him because I wanted to be like him. I didn't necessarily want to be in jail, but I wanted to be tough. I wanted to be what my environment was demanding of me.
You want some street cred?
I wanted some street cred, yeah.
Okay, cool. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is John Fontanez, and he's out of New Jersey. He has an incredible story, and I think us creating this podcast is something that's very unique in itself. Whereas I've never created a podcast, released an episode on this podcast, knowing that someone was going to be creating their own podcast. So for those of you that are listening, the main objective, our intentions here is for John Fontanez to share his story, to impact, not just share his story, but to use his story as a tool to inspire and to empower other individuals that could relate to his story. And this is just really the beginning of what you're going to learn about this guy. And we're going to be here for 8 episodes. We're going to release these bi-weekly. And at the end of that 8th episode, John is going to be like an eagle, and he's going to go out and fly he's going to spread his wings, and he's going to have his own podcast. And as we know the name of the podcast, what the podcast is going to specifically be about in the next 8 episodes you hear from him, we will be announcing little by little by little, so that you guys can go over and subscribe to his podcast as soon as it opens up, and you can also share it with your circle of influence. With that being said, John, why do you want to create a podcast?